banker's body sitting upright at his desk, eyes wide open, untouched, and smiling. The door was locked from the inside. No fingerprints, no wounds, no sign of struggle. But on the table was a single sheet of paper, completely blank. If there's one thing Sherlock Holmes believed, it's that every silence has its sound. And in this case, the silence screamed louder than any murder weapon could. What began as a simple report of a banker's heart attack quickly twisted into something far more sinister. A trail that would drag Holmes and Watson deep into the underworld of secret societies, coded messages, and a mystery that could shake the British Empire itself. It was a fog-drenched morning in London when Dr. John Watson stepped into 221B Baker Street. The air inside smelled of burnt tobacco and ink, a usual sign that Holmes had been up all night working. Papers covered the floor like autumn leaves. And in the middle of it all, Holmes sat cross-legged on the carpet, staring at a violin that wasn't making any sound. Holmes Watson sighed, hanging up his coat. "You look as though you've spent the night solving crimes with ghosts." Holmes didn't look up. "Watson, tell me what's louder, a scream or silence?" Watson blinked. "I beg your pardon." Holmes finally looked at him, eyes sharp and restless. "They say silence is peaceful. I disagree. Silence, my dear Watson, is the loudest confession of all." Before Watson could reply, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson appeared, holding a sealed envelope. "Message from the yard, Mr. Holmes." Holmes opened it with a flick of his scalpel. Inside was a short note from Inspector Lestrade, banker found dead in his office. Locked door. No struggle. Come immediately. Watson groaned. Another locked room mystery. Holmes smiled faintly. The best kind. It's the only type of crime where the room itself is the witness. The scene at Fleet Street when they arrive at the grand marble building of the Imperial Bank on Fleet Street. A crowd had already gathered. The police kept them back as Lestrade waved Holmes and Watson inside. The room was just as Lestrade described, pristine, untouched. The victim, Mr. Reginald Hale, sat perfectly upright at his desk. His eyes were open, his expression calm, even satisfied. On the desk lay a single blank sheet of paper, and in his right hand a pen still wet with ink. Watson leaned in. "He looks peaceful." Holmes crouched beside the body. Peaceful men do not die in locked rooms holding wet pens, Watson. Lestrade crossed his arms. No signs of poison. No struggle. Window sealed from the inside. The only odd thing. The paper. We checked under light. Nothing written. Completely blank. Holmes took the paper to the window. He tilted it, sniffed it. Then he smiled. The first lie is always the cleanest one. The problem appears. Over the next hour, the investigation grew stranger. The banker's assistant swore that Hale had dismissed everyone at precisely 6 p.m. The security guard confirmed that no one entered or left after that. The door had been locked from within, and the key was found in Hale's pocket. Watson whispered, "So it's suicide, then." Holmes Holmes shook his head. Watson, suicides rarely involve coded silence. Someone wanted this death to look like a mystery, and they succeeded. He lifted the banker's left hand. A faint smear of blue ink stained the index finger, not from the pen on the desk, which used black ink to inks, to truths. Holmes murmured. One scene, one hidden development, the cipher in the blank page. Back at Baker Street, Holmes placed the blank sheet over a small lamp. Slowly, faint blue marks began to appear, invisible ink. Watson gasped as words emerged across the page. The debt must be paid in silence. Watson read it aloud. The debt must be paid in silence. What on earth does that mean? Holmes tapped his pipe thoughtfully. It means, Watson, that someone believed silence was a currency, and our victim owed a very heavy sum. Over the next few days, clues began to connect. 3 other bankers across London had recently resigned without reason. One had vanished completely. All were members of an exclusive gentlemen's club, the Ecliptic Society. Holmes requested the membership list through Lestrade. That evening, he spread it across their table. 30 names, but one stood out. Lord Cedric Ashford, Holmes said softly. Founder of the Ecliptic, retired diplomat, known for unusual hobbies. Watson frowned. Such as collecting secrets, the hidden network. Holmes arranged a meeting with Ashford under the guise of financial advice. The mansion was enormous, filled with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them. Ashford greeted them warmly. Perhaps too warmly. My dear Mr. Holmes, I hear you've been investigating poor Reginald. Tragic, isn't it? Holmes smiled. Tragic indeed. Though tragedy has a peculiar way of circling the wealthy, wouldn't you say? Ashford chuckled. You see darkness everywhere, Mr. Holmes, and yet it's often the light that blinds us first, Holmes replied. During tea, Holmes casually dropped a handkerchief, his usual trick to glance around unnoticed. On the fireplace mantel, a small framed note caught his eye. Written in neat handwriting, silence is loyalty. When they left, Holmes whispered to Watson, Ashford knows far more than he pretends. That motto, it matches the hidden message on the banker's page. The clues tighten. 2 nights later, Holmes received a package, a small wooden box, unmarked. Inside was another sheet of paper, again blank. And underneath, a single blue feather. Watson stared. A feather. Holmes held it up to the light. From a blue jay, but died slightly. A symbol, perhaps. He turned to the fire, threw the paper in, and for a moment, words flared in the heat. Before vanishing, he spoke. Now he sleeps. Holmes turned pale. They're warning us. The chase and the revelation. The next morning, Lestrade arrived with grim news. Another death. A second banker found the same way. No wounds, no sound, just that same faint smile. Holmes worked non-stop for 36 hours. Every line of the hidden messages, every symbol, every feather led back to one address, a printing shop on Belliard. At midnight, Holmes and Watson entered the shop. The air reeked of chemicals. In the back room, they found presses, printing letters in invisible ink, and a ledger of names. Watson whispered, "All the ecliptic members." Holmes nodded grimly. "It's blackmail, Watson. A web of silence. The society wasn't about wealth, it was about control." Suddenly, footsteps echoed from behind. Lord Ashford emerged unarmed. "You shouldn't have come here, Holmes," he said quietly. "Silence keeps peace. Break it, and chaos follows." Holmes faced him. "Peace built on fear isn't peace. It's just a quieter kind of war." Climax the truth of the silent cipher. Holmes revealed his deduction in chilling clarity. The Ecliptic Society used invisible ink to record every secret confessed by its members' financial crimes, betrayals, and worse. Anyone who threatened to expose them was given the silent debt, a ritualistic poisoning that left no trace. Holmes had discovered traces of a rare toxin, Cyanura silentis, a chemical that stopped the heart without discoloration or scent, leaving victims frozen in calm. The ink, a formula to mark their final warning. Ashford smiled sadly. "You can't destroy what you can't prove." Holmes stepped aside. "Fortunately, I never relied on proof." Behind him, Lestrade entered with half a dozen officers. Ashford's mask cracked. For the first time, he looked afraid. Conclusion: the debt paid in truth. The following morning, as dawn broke over Baker Street, Watson looked at Holmes, tired but satisfied. "So, the debt was silence," Watson said softly. Holmes nodded. "And I paid it with noise." Watson smiled. "Meaning?" Holmes looked out the window. "The truth, Watson. It's the loudest noise there is." The echo of the ecliptic. The newspapers were calling it the banker's curse. London loved a good ghost story. And the idea of a secret society murdering men with silent poison had turned every coffee house into a debating club. Holmes hated it. "Superstition spreads faster than truth," he muttered, slamming down the Times. Watson smiled over his breakfast. "At least your name's on the front page this time." Holmes scowled. "Publicity is the tax one pays for being correct." That morning, a young messenger arrived, trembling. He handed Holmes a sealed envelope stamped with a wax sigil, a blue eclipse. Inside, a single line: "You broke the silence." "Now, hear the echo." Watson frowned. "A threat." Holmes looked thoughtful. "A promise. I suspect that night Baker Street did not sleep." Holmes sat by the window, violin resting across his knees, bow untouched. Outside, fog crawled along the cobblestones like pale smoke from the underworld. Watson had just started to drift off when a sound cracked through the night, glass shattering, then a low hiss. Holmes was already moving. "Gas bomb," he shouted, pulling Watson to the floor. A thin blue mist spread across the room, stinging their throats. Holmes tore open the window, coughing. The gas dissipated, leaving behind a faint scent of almonds. "Cyanura silentis." Again, Holmes wheezed. "They've made their reply," On the mantelpiece sat a small card that hadn't been there before, written in invisible ink, now reacting to the heat of the fire. For every word spoken, one breath taken, Watson stared. They were inside the house. Holmes nodded grimly. Inside our minds, more like, we underestimated the reach of the ecliptic. The following day, Lestrade burst into Baker Street. Another body. Holmes, and you'll want to see this one. At the docks, a shipping clerk lay dead on the pier, eyes open, a faint smile frozen on his lips. Same pattern, same toxin. But this time, there was no blank page, only a scrap of ledger paper burned along the edges. Showing half a name, Ash Watson, said Ashford. Perhaps, or perhaps, the ashes are literal, Holmes replied. He knelt, noticing faint powder near the corpse's cuff. Not ink this time, printing dust. Someone's continuing the message using fire instead of silence. Days blurred into nights as Holmes traced chemical suppliers across London. Each clue formed part of a pattern, like notes in a sinister melody. Every shop that sold invisible ink or rare toxins had received bulk orders under different aliases, but all traced back to a single warehouse in Whitechapel. They arrived there at dusk. The sign above the door read Ecliptic Imports and Press. Inside, printing machines clattered endlessly, stamping pages of nothingness. A gaunt man appeared from the shadows. You shouldn't have come. Holmes stepped forward, and yet, here I am. The man smiled, teeth stained blue. The society isn't gone, Mr. Holmes. Lord Ashford was only the mouthpiece. The true voice never speaks. Before Holmes could respond, the man bit down on something metallic. A sharp click, then silence. He collapsed, foam at his lips, self-poisoned. Watson checked for a pulse, shaking his head. He's dead. Holmes sighed. Another tongue silenced before it could sing. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread a map of London across the floor. Dozens of ink marks dotted the city. Watson, he said, tapping points with his pipe, these aren't random. They form a pattern, a constellation. The ecliptic wasn't just a name. It's a map of meeting points. Watson leaned closer. They're arranged like the phases of the moon. Exactly, Holmes whispered. Each point corresponds to an estate, a bank, or a print shop. And at the center, he drew a circle around the middle. The observatory at Greenwich. 2 nights later, they reached the Royal Observatory. Rain lashed the dome as lightning flashed over the Thames. Inside, the huge telescope stood motionless, its lens pointed not at the heavens, but downward through a hatch in the floor. Holmes pried it open. Beneath was a staircase spiraling into darkness. Shall we? He asked. What's inside? After you, of course. The steps led to an underground chamber lit by blue lanterns. In the center stood a table covered in parchment, feathers, and glass vials. Symbols of eclipses lined the walls, and on the table lay another note, glowing faintly in the lamplight. Silence is a circle. Break it, and it begins anew. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the shadows. Welcome, Mr. Holmes. We've been expecting you. figure stepped forward, cloaked, masked, unmistakably calm. "The true leader," Holmes murmured. The man laughed softly. "Names are noise. We deal only in quiet," Holmes replied. "Then let's make some noise, shall we?" What followed was chaos. Lanterns crashing, glass shattering, the hiss of chemicals igniting. Blue flames erupted as Holmes and Watson ducked for cover. The masked figure fled through a side tunnel. Holmes pursued him into the storm outside. Rain turned the cobblestones slick as they raced toward the river. The figure stumbled, mask cracking, to reveal not Ashford, but his son. "Your father's silence wasn't loyalty," Holmes shouted. "It was fear." Ashford Jr. sneered, "And fear is the only truth left." He lunged with a small blade glistening with blue poison. Holmes twisted aside, grabbing the young man's wrist and slamming it against the wall. The vial shattered, splattering harmlessly onto the stones. Police whistles blared. Lestrade's men emerged from the mist. The younger Ashford looked around, defeated. "It doesn't matter," he whispered. "The cycle continues." Holmes straightened his coat. "Then we'll just have to break the circle again." Later that dawn, Watson wrote in his journal, "Holmes says silence is never empty. After tonight, I believe him. The city breathes secrets. We merely chase the echoes." Holmes looked out the window, the first sunlight cutting through the fog. "Do you hear that, Watson?" "Hear what?" "The quiet." London's sigh of relief. Watson smiled. "Until the next whisper." The whisper in the fog. London never sleeps. It only murmurs. A carriage rattles by. A window shuts. A stray dog howls somewhere down Baker Street, and the fog listens to it all. Holmes once told me the city itself keeps secrets, as if its bricks were ears. Tonight, it was listening again. The morning after the Ashford case closed, we expected peace. Instead, Holmes stood by the fireplace, studying the Times with that half-smile that meant trouble. He pointed to the classifieds. "Do you see it, Watson?" I squinted. "Do I see what?" He tapped a tiny advert wedged between lost umbrellas and piano lessons, "Seeking silence at dawn. The echo awaits the listener." Watson shrugged. "Another of your admirers, perhaps." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Or a ghost still speaking. The ecliptic is trying to resurrect itself through the newspapers." That afternoon we visited the Times printing office. The editor, a balding man with ink-blackened fingers, swore the ad came in anonymously with payment in silver coins, each stamped with a crescent moon. Holmes examined one under his magnifying glass. Not a coin, a token, minted privately. "Where do you suppose they're made?" I asked. He smiled. "If the fog could mint money, this is what it would look like." Outside, the streets were damp and gray. A thin figure watched us from across the road, half hidden behind a lamppost. Holmes whispered, "Don't turn your head, Watson." "Why?" "Because the watcher disappears when noticed." We walked on. When I risked a glance back, the figure was gone, leaving only a folded scrap of paper on the wet pavement. Holmes picked it up. Written in the same invisible ink style, "The Whisperer knows you." That night, Holmes couldn't sit still. He moved from desk to window, window to violin, violin back to desk. Every organization that dies leaves an echo, he muttered. Someone always tries to fill the silence. The whisperer. An heir, perhaps, or a rival. Precisely at midnight, a soft knock rattled our door. Mrs. Hudson entered, pale. There's a man downstairs, Mr. Holmes. He refuses to give his name. Says he's being followed by the fog itself. Holmes nodded. Send him up. The man who entered looked half dead from exhaustion, eyes darting toward every shadow. He introduced himself as Mr. Vane, a reporter. They killed my editor, he stammered. Said he printed something he shouldn't have. They call him the Whisper. He leaves messages in the weather reports. Holmes raised a brow. Weather reports. Vane nodded. First letters of each line. They spell things, names, warnings. Today's spelled Holmes. Watson felt a chill. You mean he's writing to us? Holmes simply smiled. Then let's write back. By dawn, Holmes had filled 3 pages with coded drafts. He paid a boy to deliver one to the Times desk with instructions to run it under miscellaneous notices. Echo received. Listener waiting at midnight, Tower Bridge. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Holmes carried nothing but his walking stick. My revolver. At midnight, the fog was so thick it swallowed even the lamps. Under Tower Bridge, a shadow waited, thin, deliberate, motionless. You answered, the voice said, low and dry, neither male nor female. The circle never ends. Holmes stepped forward. Then tell me how to break it. The ecliptic was never ours, the figure whispered. It was born in the printing ink. The messages, they write themselves now. A sudden gust tore through the arches. When the fog cleared, the figure had vanished, leaving behind a dripping envelope. Inside, a sliver of metal etched with small letters forming a spiral. Listen below the city. Back at Baker Street, Holmes laid the metal under a magnifier. The spiral wasn't random. It was a map of London's sewers. Below the city, he said softly. The whisperer hides where silence truly reigns beneath our feet. I sighed. So, our next descent is into the sewers. Holmes grinned. Pack a strong stomach, Watson. The truth rarely smells pleasant. The voice under London, the city above, slept peacefully, unaware of the shadows moving beneath its streets. Holmes and I descended into the labyrinthine sewers, the spiral map guiding us through winding tunnels slick with water and time. The smell was a mixture of decay and damp stone. But Holmes seemed invigorated. Most men would turn back here, Watson, he said softly. But we seek what men fear, and fear is a great teacher. I clutched my lantern, trying not to imagine the creatures that might be watching from the darkness. Rats scuttled past our feet, indifferent to our presence. Holmes paused at a fork in the tunnel, holding the spiral map to the lantern's light. The whisperer left more than a map. These tunnels are designed as a maze. Only one path leads to the truth. We took the left path. Water seeped through cracks in the ceiling, dripping steadily. Then, faintly, we heard it, a whisper, so soft it seemed like the fog itself was speaking. "Holmes, Watson, follow." I froze. "Did you hear that?" Holmes smiled faintly. "The echo speaks only to those who listen carefully. Steady your nerves. This is where the game truly begins." We followed the voice through a maze of passages. Along the walls were crude etchings, small eclipses, spirals, and letters barely legible. Holmes bent down to study them. "Each mark is a warning, Watson," he murmured. "The Whisperer knows we are coming." A sudden splash ahead startled us. Holmes raised his hand. We froze. A shadowy figure moved across the water, disappearing around a corner. Holmes whispered, "Quickly, follow." The tunnels opened into a large chamber. The air was warmer, almost suffocating, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed around us like applause. In the center was a pedestal, and atop it, a small crystal box. Inside, a folded parchment shimmered faintly. Holmes approached cautiously. "The message waits for us, but the trap may be closer than we think." I stepped forward as Holmes reached for the box. Suddenly, the floor beneath us shifted, a hidden mechanism triggered. The pedestal spun, and water began to rise rapidly around our ankles. Holmes grabbed my arm. "Hold steady. Panic is the enemy here, Watson." The whisper returned, louder now, reverberating through the chamber. "Only truth frees the voice. Lie, and be silent forever." Holmes extracted the parchment and unfolded it. On it was a series of symbols and letters, invisible ink reacting faintly to the lantern's flame. "An invitation," he said, "or a challenge. The Whisperer wants us to decode this before the chamber fills entirely." I peered over his shoulder. "What does it say?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "It's a riddle, Watson. The Ecliptic's legacy, hidden in their code. Solve it, and the voice reveals itself. Fail, and..." He let the words hang. Thought water now lapped against our knees. The puzzle was complex. Letters interwoven with spirals, dots, and eclipses. Holmes worked silently, muttering patterns and cross-referencing past cases in his mind. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, he straightened. "Found it. The Whisperer's message. It leads to a chamber beneath Temple Bar. There, the voice itself waits." We emerged from the sewers into the empty streets, rain pouring from above. The city looked peaceful again, oblivious to the danger lurking beneath. "Do you think the Whisperer will be expecting us?" I asked. Holmes tapped the map. "They are always expecting, but never expecting us to think like we do. That is our advantage. At Baker Street, we prepared for the next night's descent. Lanterns checked, revolver loaded, and mental calculations completed. Holmes moved with a rhythm I had learned to trust, methodical, precise, almost musical in his focus. "This will not be easy, Watson. The Whisperer is clever. Perhaps the cleverest of the Ecliptic's heirs," Holmes said, lighting his pipe. "But cleverness cannot outrun observation. And observation is my ally." As night fell, the city's fog thickened. Holmes and I set out toward Temple Bar, shadows stretching across the streets like fingers. Each step brought the anticipation closer, a confrontation that promised to unravel the final secrets of the ecliptic society's silent empire. And somewhere beneath London, the voice waited. The Whisperer's secrets are about to be revealed, but danger lurks with every step. Click the next video, Part 5, The Chamber of the Silent Echo, to see Holmes face the mastermind beneath. London, the Chamber of the Silent Echo. Temple Bar lay cloaked in fog, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Holmes and I moved quietly, our footsteps muffled by the wet cobblestones. Every shadow seemed alive, every distant clang a warning. Holmes whispered, "The Whisperer's chamber lies beneath the foundations. The entrance is hidden beneath the old stones." Watch for irregularities. I scanned the pavement. A slight rise caught my eye, a rectangular stone slab different from the rest. Holmes crouched and pressed a corner. A faint click echoed. Slowly, the slab shifted, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward. The air below was cold, damp, and smelled of earth and stone. Lanterns in our hands cast dancing shadows along the walls. At the bottom, a massive chamber opened up, shaped like a dome, with walls lined in ancient brick. Strange etchings ran along the curves, eclipses, spirals, and symbols I had never seen before. In the center, a small platform held a single chair and a lectern. On the lectern, a glowing parchment flickered faintly. The whispering began again, faint at first, like a wind weaving through the bricks. "Welcome, listeners. To hear is to risk, to see is to survive." Holmes advanced, examining the etchings. Every symbol corresponds to a name, a code, or a death. The Whisperer has been cataloging secrets for decades. Silent murders, blackmail, hidden sins. And we are now part of the story. The parchment contained invisible ink, faint blue symbols that shifted when the lantern's flame passed over them. Holmes carefully decoded each symbol, his mind moving faster than mine could follow. The Whisperer has predicted every step of this investigation. Holmes said, voice low, "They've been waiting for us, but not for our failure. For our insight." A shadow moved in the corner. The Whisperer appeared, tall, masked, robe flowing like liquid shadow. "Holmes," the figure said, "so clever, yet so blind. You've solved parts of the puzzle, but the whole eludes you." Holmes stepped forward. "I don't need the whole, only the truth." The Whisperer gestured, and small panels on the walls slid open, revealing dozens of vials, letters, and small locked boxes. Each represented a victim, each a secret kept in silence. Every banker, every official, every member of the ecliptic, all catalogued, the Whisperer said. "And now, you, Holmes, are part of the archive." I felt a chill. Part of the archive. Holmes ignored me. He circled the chamber, studying the vials. "The Whisperer doesn't need weapons," he said. "The power of fear, secrecy, and prediction is far deadlier. The challenge became clear. Decode the archive, locate the mechanism controlling the chamber, and prevent the next death. The Whisperer's plan was already in motion. A vial labeled for a prominent politician sat on a tray. Its liquid faintly blue. Holmes studied it carefully. Cyanura, Silentis, modified, quick acting. But the formula reveals a flaw. The antidote is simple, if administered within minutes. The Whisperer noticed our discovery. Ah! Intelligence. They moved closer, voice colder. Yet, intelligence without action is worthless. Holmes smiled. Then action is precisely what we'll take. Using his knowledge of chemistry, deduction, and timing, Holmes manipulated the chamber. Hidden levers revealed a narrow passage behind the lectern. He whispered to me, "Follow me carefully. One mistake, and the poison spreads. The Whisperer must not escape. We advance, carefully avoiding traps." The Whisperer tried to intercept, but Holmes had anticipated the moves. Using a combination of shadows, reflections, and the chamber's acoustics. He trapped the figure against the far wall, with Lestrade's men rushing through a second hidden entrance. The Whisperer finally removed the mask, revealing not one face, but a network of operatives trained to continue the Ecliptic's work. Holmes's deduction was precise. The Ecliptic's Whisperer was no single person, but a rotating position among loyal heirs, each keeping the society alive in silence. By dawn, the chamber was secured. Letters, vials, and ledgers were confiscated. The secrets of the Ecliptic were now evidence, and the threat of silent assassinations ended, at least for the moment. Holmes turned to me as we climbed back into the foggy streets of London. Silence can be deadly, Watson, but knowledge, properly applied, is louder than any echo. I nodded, exhausted but in awe. And yet, I said, the city itself will whisper again. There are always secrets. Holmes smiled faintly. Indeed, but tonight, London sleeps just a little easier. Shadows over London Bridge. London was quiet for only a moment. The fog that had once concealed the Ecliptic's secrets now seemed thicker, more ominous, wrapping the city like a velvet shroud. Holmes and I had barely returned to Baker Street when a series of telegrams arrived, all unsigned, all cryptic. Each read simply, "The echo continues. Shadows cross the bridge. Stop them." Holmes tapped his pipe thoughtfully. "The Ecliptic has not perished. They move, adapting. Their game has shifted from underground chambers to the streets themselves." I frowned. "The bridge." Holmes nodded. "London Bridge, a perfect vantage for observing, signaling, and striking." That evening, we took our usual positions near the Thames, the mist curling round the street lamps. From above, the bridge looked ordinary, but Holmes's eyes traced patterns invisible to me. Dark shapes, faint flickers of blue. The rhythm of footsteps that belonged to more than ordinary pedestrians. "Observe carefully, Watson," Holmes whispered. "The Ecliptic leaves patterns in plain sight. Most men never notice until it's too late." Minutes passed, then a figure appeared at the center of the bridge, clad clad in black, moving with deliberate grace, holding what looked like a small box. Holmes's gaze sharpened. That, he said, is our next messenger. Or our next threat. We followed at a distance. The figure paused midway on the bridge, lifted the box, and began to carve symbols into the stone with a tiny chisel. Sparks flew faintly, catching in the fog. Holmes studied the markings. Codes, messages, instructions. The ecliptic communicates through symbols now, visible only to those trained to see them. I squinted. You mean anyone could walk past and never know? Exactly, Holmes said. They thrive in invisibility, in plain sight. Before we could act, a second figure emerged from the shadows. They moved silently, intercepting the first figure. A struggle broke out, brief but sharp. Holmes and I closed in, catching the two as they attempted to flee. The first figure dropped the box. Holmes pried it open. Inside, several letters, each containing fragments of invisible ink, faintly glowing under the lantern's light. Holmes examined them carefully. Instructions for a series of heists and murders. The Whisperer is expanding operations using remnants of the society to continue the legacy. I shivered. So the threat isn't gone. They've gone mobile. Holmes nodded. Worse, they've become adaptive. And every step we take must anticipate their moves, not just react to them. The second figure, restrained by Lestrade's men, remained silent. Holmes leaned in, voice low. You can speak or remain part of the shadows. Which will it be? Finally, a hoarse whisper. The bridge. It's only the beginning. The city listens, and so do we. Holmes studied the letters, matching the symbols to their locations across London. Each site, banks, print shops, warehouses formed a web across the city. The ecliptic's network is still alive, Holmes said grimly, and London Bridge is their signal. Every message, every symbol, every whisper leads somewhere. I asked, somewhere dangerous. Holmes gave a half-smile. Dangerous. Yes, but illuminating. The closer we get, the more of the network we can dismantle. That night, we returned to Baker Street to plan. Holmes spread a large map across the floor, marking each site where a symbol had been placed. He drew lines connecting them, revealing a complex geometric pattern, almost celestial in design. Watson, he said, tapping the map, this pattern is no accident. The ecliptic uses London itself as their cipher. Streets, bridges, buildings, all instruments in their code. I leaned closer. So, we're playing their game, but on their board. Holmes nodded. Precisely. But a player who observes carefully can turn the board to their advantage. The next morning, the fog lifted briefly, sunlight piercing the river. Holmes and I stood by the bridge once more, ready to follow the path the ecliptic had laid out. Observe, anticipate, intercept, he muttered. That is the rhythm of survival against this society. The shadows had begun to stir again, and so had we. The labyrinth beneath the city. The night after London Bridge felt heavier than usual. The air itself seemed to hum with tension. Somewhere deep beneath the cobblestone veins of the city, The Ecliptic Society was rebuilding, and Holmes knew it. In Baker Street, he sat before the map once more. Every street a line of thought, every bridge a pulse in the heart of London. I watched as his eyes darted between symbols drawn in chalk across the floor. The whisperer was not the architect, Holmes said quietly, only the mouthpiece. There's another mind, a deeper one, that builds the labyrinth. A labyrinth, I asked. Yes, Watson. Beneath the very city we stand upon, a structure of tunnels older than London itself. The Ecliptic have found refuge there, repurposing forgotten catacombs into their hidden stronghold. He paused, then added, and tonight we enter it by midnight. We stood before an abandoned wine merchant's shop. Its windows were boarded, its sign half-rotted, but beneath the floorboards lay a secret older than the building itself. Holmes uncovered a trapdoor, narrow and iron dash-bound. As it creaked open, a gust of cold, stale air greeted us. Down we go, Watson, Holmes said, lantern in hand. The truth rarely lives above ground. The tunnel beneath was vast carved stone arches dripping with condensation, the air thick with silence. Echoes of distant water dripped somewhere far ahead. Every few steps, we saw strange markings, spirals, eclipses, and small metallic plates engraved with numbers. Holmes crouched beside one. A navigational code. The Ecliptic's internal map system. To them, this labyrinth is home to us. It's a maze of death. He studied the sequence and whispered, each number corresponds to a location above ground, bank vaults, churches, police stations. Their network isn't just symbolic, Watson. It's physical. As we moved deeper, the tunnels twisted like serpents. The walls began to narrow, and the air grew warm, almost suffocating. Then we heard it, footsteps, faint but steady. Holmes extinguished the lantern. Quiet, they're close. We hid behind a pillar as three figures passed, carrying crates sealed with the mark of the Ecliptic, a black sun with a spiral core. Their voices echoed faintly. The shipment goes to the central chamber. The others await the signal. Holmes leaned close. The central chamber, that's where the leader hides. The mind behind the labyrinth. When the figures vanished, we followed. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into an enormous underground vault. Massive gears lined the walls, turning slowly, driven by steam and machinery. At the center was a raised platform surrounded by water. On it, a tall man in a gray coat adjusted a complex mechanism, a clockwork map of London itself. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Archibald Wechsler, he murmured. Once an engineer for the Crown, declared dead 5 years ago. I whispered, he's the architect. Holmes nodded. The very one. He's been using London's old infrastructure to rebuild the Ecliptic, brick by brick. Holmes stepped into the open. Mr. Wechsler, the city may have forgotten you, but I have not. Wechsler turned slowly, his face pale and sharp eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Oh, Mr. Holmes," he said softly, "the only man who sees too much. You've arrived just in time to witness progress." He gestured toward the clockwork map. The gears shifted, and hundreds of tiny lights lit up, each marking a building above ground. Every gear corresponds to a lever in the city of Valve, a pipe, a tunnel. I control the flow beneath London, water, air, and perhaps more. Holmes's voice was calm. You're planning something larger, not destruction, Holmes. Renewal. The ecliptic were never killers by passion, they were cleaners. We remove corruption, one breath at a time. Suddenly, the platform began to rise, driven by the machinery below. Wexler activated a lever, and a low rumble spread through the tunnels. Pipes hissed, valves turned. Holmes realized the truth. He's releasing gas through the city's underworks. Every vent, every drain, every pipe. It'll suffocate half of London before dawn. I raised my revolver, but Holmes stopped me. No, he wants panic. He wants us to act without thought. Instead, Holmes dashed toward the machinery, studying the pattern of levers. These valves are timed. If we reverse the sequence, pressure collapses inward instead of outward. The ground trembled as steam hissed violently. Wexler shouted, "You can't stop it. The city will purge itself." Holmes worked furiously, hands moving with precision. "Watson, on my mark, pull the red valve." "Which one's red?" "The one that screams louder than the rest." We acted in unison. Steam burst from the pipes, the gears slowed, and a deafening roar filled the chamber. Wexler tried to reach the control panel, but the platform collapsed beneath him, plunging into the black water below. Holmes and I barely escaped as the labyrinth began to flood. The old city beneath London drowned its own secrets once again. When we finally emerged above ground, the first light of dawn touched the river. The city was alive, unaware of how close it had come to death. Holmes looked back toward the water. "London hides its sins well," he said softly. "But for every labyrinth that falls, another begins." I asked, "Do you think he survived?" Holmes exhaled. "A man who builds in shadows never dies so easily. We'll see his work again." The clockmaker's code, the days following the collapse of the labyrinth, were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Holmes spent his mornings by the window of Baker Street, pipe in hand, eyes scanning the skyline. "Listen, Watson," he said one morning. "Do you hear it?" I frowned. "Hear what?" He tapped the glass gently. "Time. London's heartbeat. But it's off. The rhythm is broken." I strained to listen. The city's usual hum, the carriages, the bells, the trains all blended as usual. Yet Holmes was right. The great clocks of the city, St. Paul's, Westminster, the tower, each chimed at slightly different moments. "Someone has altered London's time," Holmes said. "And time, my dear Watson, governs everything: trains, meetings, money, and death." The next clue came by post. A small wooden box with no return address. Inside, a brass pocket watch, its hands spinning backward. Engraved on the back was a symbol, a spiral within a sun, the mark of the ecliptic. Holmes smiled faintly. "Wexler's not dead. He's has evolved. And this, he held up the watch, is his next move. He opened the casing. Inside the mechanism was an impossible design, gears interlocked in ways no human hand could replicate. Beneath them, a tiny slip of paper read, "When clocks align, the city will reset." Holmes began tracing reports of strange phenomena. Watchmakers across London had been receiving anonymous orders, blueprints for intricate clock parts with no clear purpose. One man, an elderly craftsman in Whitechapel, spoke to us nervously. "They came at night," he said, "paid in gold. Asked me to build a piece that never stops ticking, even without winding. Said it was for a monument." Holmes studied the man's sketches. "A perpetual clock," he muttered. "Impossible, yet possible. With Wechsler's genius, we followed the trail. Warehouses, clock towers, old railway stations. Everywhere we went, we found fragments of clockwork, brass gears, screws, fragments of an enormous mechanism. Finally, we discovered its heart beneath Westminster Bridge. Hidden inside one of the massive stone pillars was a hollow chamber filled with machinery." Holmes's eyes lit with grim realization. Wechsler has built a time engine, a mechanism designed to control London's synchronization. I frowned. "But why?" He turned to me. "Imagine it, Watson. A single device that controls every clock, every system. Whoever controls time controls movement, and whoever controls movement controls power." He studied the inscriptions carved into the gears. "This is the clockmaker's code, a mathematical pattern designed to trigger a cascade when all city clocks strike midnight together. If we fail to stop it, every automated valve, gate, and telegraph in London will activate simultaneously. Chaos, fire, or worse." As we worked, Holmes became feverishly focused. "There's no keyhole, no lever. The mechanism listens. Sound is the trigger. A specific tone, a frequency." He paused, then snapped his fingers. "The bells, the city's bells, are the code. When Big Ben, St. Paul's, and the tower chime together, the resonance completes the pattern. Wechsler has turned the entire city into an instrument. We had less than 4 hours before midnight. As the city slept, Holmes and I climbed the stairs inside the tower. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rolled above. At the top, beneath the giant clock face, the gears turned steadily. Holmes adjusted his pocket watch, counting every second. When the bells toll, the frequencies converge. He said, "If we alter one clock, even by a second, the chain breaks." I nodded. "And if we don't?" He looked out at the city. "Then London wakes to silence." The bells began to stir. "Now, Watson," Holmes shouted. We worked quickly, disconnecting gears, rewiring small cogs. Sparks flew as we forced the mechanism off its rhythm. The tower groaned, its metal skeleton straining. Then from below came a voice, calm, mocking Holmes. "You're always on time." Wechsler stood at the base of the tower, soaked by the rain, a pistol glinting in his hand. Holmes didn't look down. "I'd say I'm early, Wechsler." The clockmaker, however, is late. The bells struck 12. But instead of harmony, a discordant sound tore through the city. A shriek of metal, the grinding of gears, the resonance shattered the pattern. Wexler screamed, "You've undone perfection." Holmes turned, his voice steady. "Perfection is the greatest illusion of all." The clock mechanism burst apart, gears flying in every direction. Wexler stumbled backward into the shadows as steam filled the tower. When it cleared, he was gone. Holmes and I stood in silence, watching the rain wash over the city. "Do you think he'll return?" I asked. Holmes smiled faintly. "A clockmaker never leaves his work unfinished. Somewhere in this city, another gear is already turning." He closed a broken pocket watch and slipped it into his coat. "Until it stops ticking, we stay vigilant." The return of the Whisperer. A week had passed since the clockmaker's code was broken. London was quiet again, or at least it pretended to be. But Holmes wasn't himself. He sat by the window for hours, staring into the fog. His violin lay untouched. The fire burned low, and though the city's clocks ticked normally once more, there was something off about him, as if a sound only he could hear kept repeating. That night, I heard him muttering in his sleep, the voice, "It's not gone. It's beneath the ticking." I tried to wake him, but he shot upright suddenly, eyes wild. "Watson, did you hear it?" "Hear what?" He whispered, the Whisperer. "He's back." The next morning, I found a letter slid under our door. No name, no address. Only one line written in black ink that shimmered faintly under the light. "You stopped the clock, but not the echo." Holmes held the paper close to the fire, and hidden text revealed itself an address. "An old warehouse by the river," he murmured. "The voice wants us to follow." I sighed. "You think it's a trap?" Holmes smiled, the kind of smile that told me he already knew it was. "Naturally, but even traps have blueprints." "And I intend to study this one closely." We reached the warehouse just after sunset. The building loomed over the water. Windows shattered, doors chained shut. Holmes picked the lock with quiet precision. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of machine oil. The only light came from a single lantern placed on the floor in the center of the room. Beside it lay a phonograph, an old recording device, its needle already turning, though no one was near it. Then it began to speak. "Sherlock Holmes, you think the voice is a man, but it never was. The Whisperer lives in sound, in rhythm, in every secret you've uncovered." The voice was low, distorted, yet oddly familiar. Holmes froze. "Watson, that voice is mine." For a moment, I thought he was joking, but then I heard it too. The tone, the cadence, the very rhythm of Holmes's own speech played back to him like a mirror. The phonograph continued, "You made me, Holmes. Every case, every deduction, every secret you forced into the light, they gave me form. I am your echo." gritted his teeth. So Wexler recorded me. He used my words notes, my own investigations to construct the whisperer's voice. He turned to me. "Watson, don't you see? It's not just a man, it's an algorithm of deduction itself, a mechanical reflection of my mind." Suddenly, machinery above us roared to life. The warehouse ceiling opened, revealing a massive circular array of speakers and wires. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards. Holmes shouted. He's using sound waves, manipulating resonance to control the city's devices. This is how he intends to speak to everyone at once. I covered my ears. How do we stop it? Holmes rushed to the phonograph, examining its mechanism. Every signal must have a source. Destroy the heart, and the voice dies. He pried open the machine, revealing a small crystal amplifier. Pulsing with blue light, a shard of Wechsler's clockwork design. The last piece of the clockmaker's code, Holmes muttered. He's embedded it into sound itself. The hum grew louder, walls trembling, glass shattering. I could feel the vibration in my chest. "Holmes, we have seconds," I shouted. Holmes grabbed his cane and smashed the amplifier. A burst of sound like thunder filled the room, knocking us both to the ground. The lights flickered and the hum stopped. Silence, deep, absolute, filled the warehouse. Then, faintly, a final whisper echoed from the phonograph, destroying the voice. "Won't silence the truth." Later, back at Baker Street, Holmes sat quietly by the fire. "Watson," he said finally, "I've realized something. The Whisperer wasn't just an enemy. It was an idea born from the things we refused to see. Every time we solved a case, we left echoes behind. Secrets uncovered don't vanish. They evolve." He looked toward the window, where the fog had thickened again. "The voice isn't gone. It's waiting, listening. And one day, it will speak again." The final game. The night London forgot to breathe. That's how I'll remember it. A fog so thick, it muffled even the sound of the horses on Baker Street. The gas lamps glowed like dying embers. Then Sherlock Holmes, my friend, my brother in arms, was standing in the middle of the room, staring at a single playing card on the table. The Queen of Hearts, except her face was missing. Instead, printed across it in faint silver ink, were the words, "The final game begins at midnight." Holmes didn't speak. He didn't have to. I could feel it, the way his hands trembled ever so slightly, the way his eyes darted to the window as if expecting something to appear out of the dark. He finally muttered, "Watson, the Whisperer's echo has found a host." We followed the trail to the edge of the city, an abandoned theater, once grand, now broken and hollow. As we entered, the air smelled of dust and secrets. A stage stood at the far end, covered in torn curtains and shattered mirrors. Rows of empty seats faced it, each with a single card placed neatly in the center. Holmes walked down the aisle, touching one of the cards. "He's watching, Watson. This entire place is wired with sound. Every breath we take is being recorded." Then, from the stage, a voice echoed, rich, theatrical, mocking. "Bravo, Mr. Holmes. arrived just in time for the final act. The spotlight flickered on. Standing beneath it was a man wearing a porcelain mask, half smiling, half blank. Holmes's jaw tightened. Wexler. But the man laughed softly. Wexler is gone. You destroyed his body, but not his work. I am what he left behind, the voice, the machine, and the memory of you. Holmes stepped forward. You call yourself the Whisperer. The masked figure tilted his head. Names don't matter, Holmes. Only echoes do. The walls began to hum again, a familiar low frequency that made my teeth ache. The mirrors on the stage shimmered and suddenly reflected not us, but hundreds of versions of Holmes, each moving slightly out of sync. Holmes whispered, "He's recreated me in sound and sight." A hall of reflections built from my own deductions. The masked man spread his arms. Tell me, detective, if every one of these reflections thinks exactly like you. Which one is real? Holmes didn't answer. He was studying the stage, the wires, the mirrors, the pulse of light. Then, slowly, a smile formed. You've made one mistake, Holmes said softly. The masked man tilted his head. And that is... Holmes stepped forward. You forgot that mirrors don't think, they only copy. Before the Whisperer could respond, Holmes struck one of the stage cables with his cane. Sparks burst from the ceiling. The lights flickered wildly, and the hum broke into static. Each reflection of Holmes began to distort, faces melting, voices overlapping, collapsing into chaos. The Whisperer screamed, his voice splitting through the sound waves. You can't destroy what's already inside you. Holmes shouted over the noise. Then I'll silence myself if I must. He tore the wire from the control panel and jammed it into the phonograph's amplifier. The entire theater erupted in a flash of white light and a thunderclap of pure silence. Then nothing. When I woke, the theater was in ruins. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Holmes lay on the stage, unconscious but alive. I dragged him outside into the cold night air. After what felt like hours, he stirred. Watson, he whispered weakly. Did we win? I smiled through the exhaustion. Yes, old friend, it's over. Holmes looked toward the dawn. No, Watson, it's never over. Every thought we've ever had leaves a trace, a whisper in the world. We can't silence truth, only decide which version of it we live by. And with that, he closed his eyes again, not in defeat, but in peace. Weeks later, back at Baker Street, I sat alone by the fire, finishing the final entry in my notes. London had returned to normal, but sometimes, when the clocks struck midnight, I still thought I heard it, a faint whisper beneath the ticking. Maybe it was imagination, or maybe Holmes was right, because legends don't die. They echo. If you think the story ends here, think again. The echoes of Holmes are far from gone. Click the next video, The Case That Never Ends, to see how the legend of Sherlock Holmes lives on in ways no one could ever predict.